Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Cheryl Finley, and it's my great pleasure this evening to moderate a panel about alumni art and culture as part of our virtual career week. And I'm going to begin just by talking about our alums, our illustrious alums, to give you a sense of, where they come from, the work that they're doing now. And then we're going to just get into a conversation about what it was like to be at the AUC when they were there, and the kinds of courses and career paths that they took in order to be in the positions that they are now in the art ecosystem. So I'm going to begin with Nick Briere Aziz, who is a Haitian American interdisciplinary artist and curator, born and raised in New Orleans. And I just have to say I have family from New Orleans too, and make a mean gumbo. But Nick's current practice is deeply community focused and rooted around the utilization of personal and collective histories to reimagine the future. He's worked extensively leading community engaged projects throughout New Orleans with entities such as the Office of Mayor Mitch Landreau, Antenna, the Joan Mitchell Center, the Arts Council of New Orleans, and Prospect. And we're really excited to have this conversation with you, Nick, because of our connection to Prospect this coming summer through summer interns. In addition to his personal art making practice, he currently serves as the community engagement curator for the New Orleans Museum of Art. And he's also the manager of the Haitian Cultural Legacy Collection, a collection of over 400 artworks started by his maternal grandfather in 1944. I also just wanted to say, look around or behind Nick to see some of this collection. And we're going to begin talking about that as I continue with our introductions with Ashley Harris, who's a marketing and art executive currently serving as head of marketing for Mana Contemporary's Arts and Culture division since just this year. Prior to that, she was executive director of Independent Art Fair, where she was hired to come up with the cultural programming and year-round beyond the once a year fair. She's a New York City resident, and her self-described untraditional background has helped her to navigate the art world in unique ways. For example, from 2016 to 2019, she worked her way up at Sotheby's auction house, helping to restructure the marketing department to operate as an in-house strategic agency, treating internal stakeholders as clients to help reap great rewards in that position. I'd like to now turn to Molando Jones, whose work converges at the intersection of art, marketing, entrepreneurship, professional development, and social justice. As founder of The Clever Agency, a content creation and brand development consultancy, Molando leads a team focused on producing original content, marketing campaigns, and communications strategies. Very Clever Studios, a project of the Clever Agency, is designed to amplify the work of emerging performing artists, entrepreneurs, and disruptors. At Queen's Council on the Arts, QCA, Molando managed development programs for artists for 6 years, as well as administering the Sukasa Artist in Residence program. And he also designed that to improve the quality of life for our city's elders through the arts. So Molando has also a very long career pathway that he can discuss with us. And lastly, I'd like to tell you something about Michelle Lanier, who is an Afro-Carolina folklorist and oral historian, museum professional, filmmaker, and educator with over 2 decades of commitment to her callings. Raised in both Columbia and Hilton Head, South Carolina, and having ancestral roots in the Sandhills, Coastal Plain, and Upper Piedmont of North Carolina, Michelle's ancestral geography guides much of her interdisciplinary work. She was an English major at Spelman College and graduated from the honors program in 1997 before studying folklore at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She's also a seasoned public humanities professional, and in 2018, Michelle was named as the first African-American director of all of North Carolina's 25 state-owned historic sites, and I think that's really quite an accomplishment. In 2018, she successfully advocated for legislation creating the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission, which she led as its founding executive director, along with serving as the curator of cultural history for North Carolina's historic sites. She's also served on the faculty for the Center for Documentary Studies at Duke University since 2000. So I'd like to just turn to our panelists now and begin a conversation. And I want everyone to note that you can see where our panelists have gone to school. Nick was at Morehouse and finished in 2012, Mulatto at Morehouse in 99, Ashley at Spelman in 11, and Michelle at Spelman in 1997. And I thought it might be interesting just to begin a conversation about, what was it like for you to study at the AUC when you were there? Do you think that the courses that you took, the majors that you graduated with, were those that kind of took you to where you are now in the careers that you're enjoying? And anyone can jump in.
I'll kick it off. I'd say definitely the major, as a business major, I think I definitely utilize some of that knowledge in my work now. I think there's so much about the art industry that involves business that a lot of times I think isn't thought about, particularly from an artist standpoint. And so I think that has given me an advantage in having a dad who has been about entrepreneurship and business his entire life. So I think I combine that. But I think apart from the courses, I think the environment itself really has impacted my work and path. Like I think my decision to go to Morehouse was so much because of my mom and her prioritizing that space. Because I remember before I went, I was like, oh no, like I need to go to a more diverse environment. I need to go to, a bigger school. And I would argue now that, HBCUs are more diverse, than PWIs. And I, would say that in so many different ways. And so I think just the experiences I had in that environment of just the spectrum of Blackness, the friends that I made, the way that I was able to kind of just like experiment creatively. Like some of the work that I was doing at Morehouse creatively, I now, do creatively in my professional space. And so I think it just provided a space to just like really understand yourself and your voice in a way that has influenced my art practice. So.
Great. Anyone else? You want to talk about your major and your experience at the AUC? I think one of the ways that I had also posed the question before we opened up to our guests and to those of you who are here today was a question about, what would it have been like for you when you were at the AUC had you had a program like the AUC Art Collective to guide you through to a career in the arts?
I will definitely chime in. One thing also, Dr. Finley, I addressed you by Cheryl when we were speaking earlier, and I just want to apologize for that.
Oh, no worries. It's totally fine.
I will beat myself up about it throughout this whole
please
thing.
Don't.
So, I mean, it's such a treat that you have organized this for the students because I was still very much under the influence of my family when I was going through, kind of matriculating through Spelman, that I needed to graduate and really establish myself in a very respective career role, right? Whether that meant to like go to law school or to like go to med school. And at the time in which I was there, I had friends who were interested in arts and culture things. I had a friend who was going to take up an art history major. And I just remember thinking, wow, she's really ready to risk it all, what I mean? And so, and I had really had my heart set on working at Ogilvy and Mather. That was a huge deal to me. Now, I spent some time at Ogilvy, and then I spent times I spent stints at other businesses. And for me, it was really an amazing opportunity to learn the different facets of how different businesses worked. And then an opportunity presented itself at Sotheby's where they were looking for a marketing person, and the CEO and the CMO at the time were coming from media backgrounds, and they were trying to breathe new life and new innovation into this 300-year-old company. And I remember I had been like searching for a new job because I was tapped out at the Daily Beast, and I would stay up every night until like 3 and 4 in the morning. And finally this role popped up. And I didn't know that there could be an opportunity in a space like that for someone like me, and everything I had put in my toolbox. So from working at agencies to working at a publication, from working on really unique business strategies. I mean, I've worked across business, and I've worked across business initiatives from like IBM to American Express to BP. I took all those things that I learned in all those roles, and I brought them forth with me to this organization. And it was really critical for me to show those parallels. It's like, just to give you a really quick example, I'm working on a project with Sotheby's Advisory right now. And it's really tricky because they want to engage curators and they want to engage, museums and collectors and whatnot, but it is an advisory service, right? And they're kind of unsure around like, well, what type of content can we put out there that's going to be trusted and that is not going to seem as though it's coming from a really opportunistic place, and which I could pull from my experience. Hey, when I was working on British Petroleum, they had an entire PR team dedicated to talk about what they were doing to clean up the Gulf and to clean up all these like spills that they had all across the world. We can do something quite similar for how, people think that we pollute the art market. And to really separate ourselves from that, and we can develop really meaningful content in that way. And so for me, it was really being able to take everything that I had, like all the skill sets and the different business situations that I had been in, and be able to apply those from a fresh perspective to a new industry.
Right. And I think you bring up so many really relevant points, but one question I have, which is pretty foundational, could you share with everyone what your major was? And, because you've talked about communications, I could guess it might be English. I'm not sure. It might be marketing, but if you could talk about that, that might help us then move on to everyone else on the panel to see how that major, how those foundational years of the AUC ultimately influence where you land on your feet.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a wild card. I started off a biochemistry major and then switched over to English.
Okay.
Yeah, I was like, what is the easiest thing that I can do that comes to me really naturally? And for me, being an English major and looking at all these other things, even like, econ and, certain areas and of just like certain areas of science and whatnot, doing that through the lens of literature. And even like historically, that really opened my mind to, better understand all of those things. And I think everyone has a language in which their mind kind of speaks. And it's really important for you to understand what unlocks your mind. And, I think that is how I recommend, people kind of approach it if you want to be in a position to thrive.
Absolutely. One that gives you happiness every single day. Michelle, tell me about your work.
So I want to, start with your question around my AUC roots. My first kind of hook in terms of what drew me to Spelman was art. It was performance art. I was up at the age of 14 on a Saturday night, flipping through channels, and I saw the Miss HBCU pageant was on. So this would have been 1989. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the woman who was competing as Miss Spelman that year, I believe this was around the first class that had been exposed to the concept of African diaspora in the world as it was a pilot course for that group. I think my class or the class before was the very first class that had to take it. And so it was the first time I heard a young Black woman use the word or the phrase African diaspora. Her performance piece for the talent competition was a theatrical interpretation of the song For Women by Nina Simone, which offers us a window into the lives of these tropes of Black women, the angry Black woman, the Aunt Jemima stereotype, the oversexed Black woman, the tragic mulatto. And I had never heard this song. I had never heard of Nina Simone, who I later found out is, like me, Afro-Carolinian. She's from Tryon, North Carolina. And I felt electrified. And I immediately felt sure that this is the kind of woman I wanted to be. This is the kind of language that I wanted to be speaking. These were the kind of concepts that I wanted to be engaging. And so then when I visited Spelman, I went on this tour of colleges, and we went to many HBCUs, Hampton, Howard, Morgan, Spelman, Clark. And I had this moment that's kind of equivalent to when Alice Walker writes about Nettie seeing the continent of Africa for the first time, and she says a bell rang inside of me. And I felt that. I felt this kind of spiritual resonance between my own, heart, a deep connection. I mean, alma mater, it's Latin for the mother of your soul. And so I did feel that I was being welcomed home. And I was there when the ground was broken to create the space that would become the Spelman Museum of Fine Art. And then being an English major as well, under the leadership primarily of Gloria Wade Gales, I also had a chance to participate in one of her earlier performance groups. At that time, it was called Talking Drum. It has changed names over time. And so to be there during Genetical's time and to watch her value interdisciplinary intellectual inquiry that was also rooted in a kind of spirit-centered, heart-centered, compassionate, collective making.
Also art-centered too.
Very art-centered. And of course, she goes on to direct the Smithsonian Museum of African. The African Smithsonian Museum was, of course, a part of her work life. And so it was a very important time for me. If I had, so I knew I was interdisciplinary, and I actually was this close to achieving a minor in art. I was taking art history, I took design, I exchanged at Wellesley, I took printmaking, I took film, and I actually have gone on to, of course, teach documentary arts and make film myself. And so, yes, my time at Spelman and then the doors that Spelman opened up to me in terms of a domestic exchange at Wellesley, foreign exchange, across, the sea in Edinburgh and also in Panama, working with Arturo Lindsay, who was on faculty there, was really important. I do have to say this because I know we have to hear from Milando. I went with Arturo Lindsay, who was on faculty in the art department at Spelman, with a group of students to the very first collective to go to Panama for what at that time was called the Taller Portobello, and it's changed names over time. And in that collective, there were only 4 of us.
Wow.
And I just joined because I felt like I need to go to Portobello to study kind of ethnographically the beginning of my folklore work as a folklorist. And 2 of those artists, one was Amy Sherald.
Wow.
And Kalita Rawls.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. You and Amy, I think, graduated the same year.
Yeah, so of course Amy was at Clark, but constantly at Spelman. But yeah, I count Amy as my Spelman sister in a way as well. And so yes, and so we were in Panama together, and to see artists like Amy Sherald and Kalita Rawls, and then later Fahamo Peku, who I have gotten a chance to get to know, who was in and around the buildings, of course, opened my mind. The literary inquiry opened my mind to ways of knowing that then paved the way for me being a curator, a historical curator, and then now a director of 25 museum spaces.
Wonderful, wonderful. Milando, what did you major in? Tell us about your journey from Morehouse to JC.
Yes, so I majored in business administration with a concentration in marketing. And I chose that major because it was the most creative of the business disciplines. I didn't really know anyone that worked in marketing. So I was kind of just following my instinct. Like if I wanted to be a creative professional and not be poor when I graduated, I should, think about the marketing world. And I've been an artist since before I can remember. Like my mom has scrapbooks of art that I did so young, I don't even remember drawing. So I always sort of took my abilities as an artist for granted, and I never really took them seriously enough to, think of myself as one day being a real professional artist. So it wasn't until like years after Morehouse that I decided to actually pursue the track as an artist. But my draw to Morehouse was definitely through art in a way, because Spike Lee was the first, my biggest influence, I should say, to want to be at Morehouse. Do the Right Thing was my favorite movie as a teenager. I remember like getting the VHS tape when it first came out and just watching it every single day. Like I literally know that movie by heart. And so just learning about his background, and I knew Dr. King went to Morehouse, but it was more of like a line in his bio than like something that compelled me to learn more about Morehouse until after Do the Right Thing, actually. And it was also a different world. Like it totally made me want to experience the HBCU experience.
Mhm.
And while I was in school at Morehouse, I think his name was Mr. Anderson or Dr. Anderson. I could totally be wrong, but we had an art teacher where it was like the one general art class that everyone took. And I remember he used to smoke a pipe on campus and was like super chill and cool and laid back. And it was like a fun class, but it still wasn't like, it still didn't compel me to like pursue the arts professionally. But it was my time after graduating, like working in, I've worked most of my career in the nonprofit sector. And it was working in different nonprofit marketing departments that I decided, what, just from learning through those experiences, like, I could like do my own thing and, create, my own company based off of all of the different areas of interest that, I developed over the years in all of my different roles. So yeah, I ended up going to graduate school at the School of Visual Arts, aka SVA, in New York City. It's best known for its design programs. It's the first school to offer an MFA in design in the world, I think. But I went to the MFA program there, and during that period, for about 6 years, I was a professional artist. All I did was paint and have exhibitions and do commissions. At a certain point, I got tired of living the starving artist life. And then I started to tap back into my marketing foundation, went back into the workforce, and I graduated sort of into arts education. I have about a decade of experience in actually teaching art, from kids as young as 2 to the elder adult population. My oldest student has been 90. And so, yeah, my experiences have sort of been all over the place, from the business side to arts education, nonprofit administration, grants administration, entrepreneurship, and I still have my hand in all of those pots. But the Clever agency, where I focus on marketing and social media content creation, is sort of my foundation these days. And there are some people who don't know that I was a painter or an artist and only know me as the agency guy. And then there are people who don't know me as the agency guy, and they're like, why haven't you had an exhibition? I'm like, it's been 10 years. So, yeah,
Wow.
my journey.
So one of the things I wanted to ask is about, pipelines or opportunities, mentorship. One of the things that we often not just talk about, but we do in our program is we make sure that we are good mentors to our students, and we also make sure to connect our students to people that can mentor them in the field. So even in a setting just like this for Virtual Career Week, it's our hope that they'll meet people through some of these sessions that can ultimately mentor them in the future. And so I wanted to ask if in the roles that you've had in the arts and the various roles that each of you has had in the arts, have you been able to create a mentorship model or a pipeline model to mentor and work with other creatives of color as you continue to do the work that you do, either with your agency, Molando, or in the work that you're doing, with relationship to Sotheby's, or even in your own practice, Michelle? Anyone can jump in.
I'll jump in. I was at Sotheby's for almost like 5 years. And one of the things that was really apparent to me was obviously the lack of diversity. I would get to sit in pitch meetings for like major estates, and I literally knew that I was probably, if not the first, but probably the only person of color, Black person, to ever sit in some of those meetings and whatnot. And when things would get really hard for me, or it would just be really challenging, because like I said, it's a 300-year-old company. So, to make change and to try to encourage innovation was quite difficult. But I always felt that there was an onus on me to stay visible in this space and to remind myself of the privilege that I, had to be there and the opportunities that I was being given, and to show other people, to show people of my community, like, look, you can be here too. One day, one of my colleagues, she was a peer of mine, she was like, Ashley, I'm interviewing this woman. She's amazing. She's like, I want you to meet her. And I went in the conference room to meet her, and she was a sister, and I was so relieved. And she was so relieved to see me. The very first thing she said to me is, oh my God, you're not who I was expecting to walk in. And her saying that meant all the world to me. And we still talk about it today. And I'll be honest with you, I have personally not found a mentor yet, but I have been a mentor to others, and I continue to mentor her. She actually just accepted a role at Artsy, which is amazing. She and I stayed really close, after, she started at Sotheby's, and we would, she'd bounce ideas off of me, and it was a really safe space. And I always say, like, one of the best corporate luxuries a Black professional can have is another Black ally within that space. And it doesn't often happen. And when it does, it's really magical. And so, there's been Camille, and, there have been others, but for me, it's really just important to, especially in this space and some of the spaces that I've been in, like Independent or like Sotheby's, where it's just really, lacking in that regard, is to make each other feel really comfortable so that we can also have the conversations that need to be had. And that was really important to us. And we even used to joke, we all used to sit in this corner. It was me, Camille, and another friend of ours. He actually is half Puerto Rican, half Chinese. And we used to call ourselves the darkest corner of Sotheby's, which is not necessarily funny, but it was, it was a joke amongst us. But we had a killer marketing team, and we supported one another. And that was really important, because look, when I took this role, I literally told myself, I was like, Ashley, you are going to see things that aren't fair. You're going to see people get roles that they don't deserve. You're going to see people advance on because their family has $25 million of art, and Sotheby's is hoping to win it against Christie's. But I was like, but you have talent and you have experience, and that outweighs anything. And I went in, and I will say that nothing ever quite prepares you to work really, really hard and do really, really well and not get recognized for it. But what really does help is to have a support system and to have people that you can talk to and who you can still, find in, between the three of us, we really found the enthusiasm and
Right.
humor and moving forward in those ways.
So another thing that you just brought up, Ashley, is this, need to not just have mentors or, to create space to open access for people who are like you and like-minded, but it's also to think about what those networks are that help to support us and sustain us. And I think that one of the strongest networks that, that we can call on right now is right here, is this, Spell House, this HBCU network, the AUC network. And I love to hear from our other panelists on the same, question about whether that's been something you've been able to do, that is, mentoring and also creating spaces, access, and pipelines for others in your own fields.
Yeah, what I've noticed with my work is just making it kind of cyclical in a way. Like I feel like I've been given the opportunity to get advice, or even if they're like kind of like not as traditional mentors, but just older people who have done similar work that I can just share mine with and get feedback on, has been something I think that's really benefited me. But then I think in a city like New Orleans, we're obviously one of the most culturally rich cities, I think, in the world. And yet, we have youth here, youth artists who still rarely see themselves or see pathways within the creative industries, whether it's, a practicing studio artist, whether it's a curator, whether it's a art handler or installer. Like, I think a lot of the conversations I've been having recently have been around just showing those different types of examples, like the myriad of options that exist within the creative field. Because I think creativity, the arts, is such a, it's like we kind of mentioned, I think all of us, that there's no specific path. It's a lot of it is so opaque, a lot of it is so individualized, and just kind of making sure, I think, with my work, just kind of demystifying the work in a lot of ways and showing like, hey, you could go this way, you could go that way.
You're pointing out so many really key pieces, Nick, that we teach our students and that we really like to share, especially during Career Week. And those are things like, yes, you could be a curator, you could be an art historian, but you can also be an art handler, right? There are so many, the story about your experience at Sotheby's, Ashley, when we think about different parts of the art ecosystem that still need to consider the involvement and the expertise, the leadership of Black and Brown people, I often think of other professions that are in and around, say, museums and gallery spaces, or other professions that have to do even with the academy, other professions that might have to do with things like art conservation. I mean, there's so many ways that you can really pull from your experiences and your expertise to fulfill an important role within the art ecosystem. So I just wanted to hear a little bit more too from you, Michelle, about your own practice. And because I think that, I don't know, I feel like there's so many amazing role models for you. Like I can think about a Carrie Mae Weems, or, a Nina Simone, or a Zora Neale Hurston. And so I'd just be interested to hear more about, the work that you're doing and how your connections and networks to your colleagues here or other alumni from the AUC have helped you along the way.
Yes, I mean, definitely. Working in isolation in any space is dangerous mentally, I think, and it's actually dangerous physically, because you can build up so much stress in your work, carrying the weight of representation, that it will have medical implications that are dire. I hate to talk in these heavy tones, but I think it's an important cautionary tale. This cannot be isolated work. This cannot be solitary work. I think part of the value of the AUC, and for me, the value of being at Spelman, was about dismantling the myth of the Black unicorn, or the exceptional Black brilliant one. Because when I came to the AUC, I saw that these ideas of choosing one bright Black child, particularly in the South, to advance through higher level courses was not based on the realities of the brilliance in those landscapes that I was raised in. Because then when I came to Spelman, I saw there were all of these brilliant Black folks. And so I think that we have to carry that notion of collectives through our work out of the AUC and into our work. So I want to call out some real specific things. So I think it's incredibly important that all of us be paying members and active members in AAAM, the Association of African American Museums. This organization, the Association of African American Museums, invests in us across the variety of disciplines that make up the museum spaces. I think that all of us should be thinking of ways to apply for grants through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Their African American Heritage and Culture Grant is specifically for HBCUs, specifically for Black institutions. We can connect, even if we are not at an institution that identifies as a Black institution, we as experts, scholars, practitioners can be a part of those grants. We could be a part of advisory council. We could be writing letters of support. I noticed when I was at Duke University, I became tired of whining about the blight of white documentarians telling the stories of Black life. And I said, at some point, I'm gonna have to stop whining about it and do something. And so I founded a group called DAWADA, kind of based off of AfriCobra, and it's Documentarians of African Descent Alliance. And so you can create collectives. And this was so that we would know one another, cheer each other on, hold each other accountable, support each other, apply for funding together, give each other feedback on works in progress. And then additionally, I've done work such as, IMLS funded something called the Gathering Place Project, which was a multi-year effort to grow the skills of African-American museum professionals, and to grow, I like to say pathway instead of pipeline, because we're not oil or gas or some sort of petrochemical. We're people walking a path. So I like to say pathway. So I like to grow the pathway so that we can have more sojourners with us on this journey. And then, yes, I've mentored many people. The newest director of the African American Heritage Commission, the associate director, people who are in the North Carolina Arts Council. And then in terms of the people who mentor me, because there are Black folklorists in the world who work in interdisciplinary ways, like Mary Williams and Kirsten Mullen and Shira Payton. All of these people are a part of my peer set. Trudy Harris, who was on my thesis committee. But I also have mentors who are like judges. A woman who was the first Black woman Chief Justice for the Supreme Court in North Carolina, Sherry Beasley. She is a mentor of mine. So sometimes finding people in other fields who have also broken down some boundaries is really important. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for us to be creative in sustaining our own work, but also making sure that we're not the first, only, and last. I think that there are people who get an ego trip off of being the only Black person in the room. I think it's really important that we every day check ourselves so that we're not getting some sort of, boost, some sort of fix, becoming addicted to that kind of attention of exceptionalism, which is a myth.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? Rolando, did you want to add to the conversation we're having here? And I guess I'm thinking about ways too that, whether it's through mentorship or, the different pathways that we forge, that there's a certain level of connectivity that we share, whether it's through the institutions through which we've been trained or through the organizations that we are members of. And I think the idea of networking and being able to, reach out to one another, to work with one another is something else that I'd like to hear a little bit more about in your own, disciplines and practices.
Yeah, I'm an active mentor and mentee. My first job after undergrad was at the National Council of Teachers of English.
Nice.
At the time, the organization had about 100 employees, and there were 2 Black men. The other Black man is Dr. Dale Allender. He was Associate Executive Director at the time. And it took us a few months to really I guess, trust each other to a certain extent. And then we clicked immediately and have been joined at the hip ever since. And so, yeah, I speak to him 3 out of 4 times when I have a big decision to make in my life. And even if I already know what I want to do, I like to bounce my decisions off of him. He's positioned me professionally for several great opportunities that have helped establish me individually and my company, the Clever Agency. Also, through my work in arts education, I've mentored dozens of young people. I have about a dozen young people from my time in arts education who I still currently interact with, at least on a base level. And then I have 4 young people who are part of my company that were my students at one point in time. One of my partners in the Clever Agency, Ramon de los Santos, he's the creative director at the Clever Agency. He's established most of our brand identity. And he has a day job as the head of global social at Converse. So any Converse commercial, social media stuff, he does it. And this guy is 30 years old, 6-figure position. And he helped me and is helping me build and grow the Clever Agency. When I talk to people about my biggest accomplishment, he did the work, but he's my biggest accomplishment. He's someone I can point to and say, by being a part of his life, I can see what the impact of mentorship really can be. Mm-hmm. And with him being 15 years younger than me, he also keeps me in the loop and in the know. Mm-hmm. And I make sure I don't get into grumpy old man mode too quickly having him in my life. So yeah, that's one thing I tell any young professional: get a mentor if you can.
And I want, you bring up something that's so important. It's this notion of mentoring is not just from the top down. It's often from the, I'm not going to say bottom, that's not the right place, but it's intergenerational. It comes and goes in both directions. I frequently have, mentors at either 15 years on either side of me. And I don't know why that often seems to feel like a sweet spot. And then, very, very young, much younger as well. I wanted to pause and just say to our audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to share them with us through the Q&A function on your screen. And the next question I have is, I'd like to see if you have questions for each other. I know that we were talking before we went live, and I know that you have questions for one another in terms of your own experiences at the AUC, at your individual institutions, or the work that you're doing now.
I have a question. I want to know where you all lived your first year, and how bad do you miss homecoming?
That's a great question.
I really miss homecoming. I can't remember where I lived my first year. Abby, maybe. I was a transfer student. So I kind of didn't count, but I just also want to add in one thing really quickly that is I think really evident. And if we're talking about the spirit of mentorship, I think one of the things that the AUC mentors really well is this idea of entrepreneurship. And if that's not just evident through, all the ways in which we've been able to feed ourselves and our souls. And Milando is literally the poster child of it, but this, it really fosters a community of curiosity and entrepreneurship. And in that regard, I used to always do Market Fridays. And I made bracelets. I literally made jewelry, and I would sit in my dorm on the floor with my girlfriends, and I would be making bracelets. And then we pack up, and Fridays we would sell, they'd help me sell bracelets, and then I'd buy everyone dinner, or lunch, or
I miss Market Fridays.
I miss Market Fridays. And what's funny? I'm still making jewelry now. And just as of a couple weeks ago, Instagram magic, some girl with 1 million followers reposted one of my pieces, and I now have 3 times as many followers as I have before. I literally, just before we hopped on this call, was on an email with Vogue magazine because they want to borrow some pieces. And like, it's one of those things. And literally I've been hustling bracelets, since my days at Spelman. So I think that is, I love that aspect of the community. It really is. It's like, no one's path is linear. There are all these different ways in which you can create and you can monetize it, and you can find other ways to, be creative and, provide that type of insight to something different. And again, every time I get together with my alum, I'm like, gosh, I am so blessed to be a part of this network. And to anyone who's listening, please feel free to reach out to me. I actually am stunned that I've had no one ever from the Spelman network reach out to me about, just internship opportunities. Hey, Sotheby's is hiring for this role. Like, let me know. I am literally an open book. There's nothing I love more than getting jobs for people within my network. One of my girlfriends who I graduated with, she works on the press team at Sotheby's, and she has that job because I was like, hey, honestly, when I got in the door, I literally tried to stack the team with as many people.
Good. Well, look, we have your number, Ashley. So
exactly.
we will definitely be in touch. And you bring up something too, and that is this, this urge and need to be entrepreneurial. And also innovative, right? Those of you who have been in marketing, for example, about that as well. And one of the things that the program does, which I always get so excited about, is to make sure that in our coursework built into the syllabi for the courses that we teach, whether it's in art history or curatorial studies, students are expected to engage with the innovation lab at Spelman, and to have innovation and technology as, part of what their training is. And even thinking about some of the more recent high profile donations to the AUC, they include things like, a new center for entrepreneurship. So I hope that each of you who's been involved in that can, in the future, be a part of that as well.
Someone needs to take Market Fridays online, build an e-commerce platform.
Hey,
look, there are so many art businesses, especially the galleries right now, who are trying to figure out how to make online sales work and how to do so correctly, and like trying to find a better way to not have these online viewing rooms in the face of COVID. And how do you bring art to individuals in a way that can still be fully immersive, but like you can do so safely at a distance? And I think that in this environment, there are so many moments while you're on campus that you can do really incredible things that can kind of set you up for success outside of these walls. And Nick, you're like a great example of that as well. I mean, like, take advantage of those opportunities. Like, Market Friday doesn't exist, build out the e-com site for it. You know what I mean? Like, let's see that. Those are and I think too, particularly in the realm of arts and culture, is it can feel like you have to do a bunch of one thing to get recognized. And that's not true. And when I used to lecture at Sotheby's Institute of Art, my recommendation always to the student was diversify your resume. Everyone's going to have a bunch of galleries or museums or whatnot. Throw in something else. You know what I mean? Like, I started off at an agency and got to learn the ins and outs of different businesses and whatnot. And that made it really easy for me to understand how to push work out the door, and like a high level quality of work, despite having only gotten 2 weeks to work on it. You know what I mean? So
I want to ask Michelle's question. So for Nick and Molando, where did you live your first year?
I was great. Oh, G5.
Yeah, because I was LLC 1. That was we were sister brother dorms. Yeah.
Oh.
I spent a lot of time in Graves, for sure. I had a lot of friends in Graves, a lot of good times, but I lived off campus my freshman year. Me and a few of my classmates got an apartment together in College Park.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's really grown.
How did you get allowed? I was gonna say it's very grown. How were you allowed to do that?
I think we basically wrote in advance and said that we had a setup there. Like, you had to ask for permission.
Clever agency was already in action.
Literally, I've never even heard of this. You were already entrepreneurial.
Always.
Nick, are we going to get to see some of the art?
Yeah, can we see that?
Sure. I mean, I can. So these are, yeah, that's some of the collection. Yeah, as was mentioned, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, was born in Damari, Haiti, and started this collection in 1944 while he was in medical school in Montreal, just as a way to stay connected to Haiti. And then he met my grandmother in 1956. And then she became very integral in expanding the collection to what it is today. And as mentioned, it's now over 400 pieces of Haitian artwork. And so
Wow.
in a city like New Orleans, for those who don't know, in 1809, following the Haitian Revolution, the city doubled in size with the migration of Haitians. And so I used the collection as a way to really illustrate those deep connections, but also I think too, thinking about the idea of Black preservation and us collecting and preserving our histories, because obviously, like in the work that I've been doing, seeing how particularly Black contemporary art is still majority collected by white collectors, and the idea that we as Black people have the ability and really the need, we need to collect ourselves, our work, our stories, our histories, our narratives. And so I think a lot of work lately has been around that conversation of Black creating more Black collectors. And I think that's part of the business side of it, creating more Black collectors, more Black people collecting our work from our artists, So I feel like just having that history personally has motivated me to really do that, because I saw it all around me, to the point where, when I was a kid, I just thought this was normal. I just like, oh yeah, everybody didn't have, but recognizing the beauty and the importance of us really preserving our histories has been something that I've done with the collection.
It's such an important legacy. It's, I mean, you talked about it from the the business standpoint, but I just also see it as having this need to recognize and know what you have in your own history and your family and your culture, but make it part of a legacy, as well as a compulsion to collect or to purchase. And I wanted to ask, and I'm just also looking at the time, we just have about 5 minutes left. Is the collection, is it housed, because there are 400 pieces, do you have it on display all of the time, or do you have to keep it in storage? And are you able to use it in your community-based work as well?
Yeah, so it's majority of it is currently in storage, but over the past, I've been curating shows in the city with it since 2015. So like my first show was with the Arts Council of New Orleans, and it stayed in that space for several months, and then I had an exhibition series actually that was up for 2 years up until last August with Preservation Hall, which is one of our most notable jazz venues. And so like that was like a 2-room space that I kind of just rotated the collection through. And then for about 3 years, I had an exhibition up at an old school, which turned into a market called Dryads Market here, uptown New Orleans. And that was up for 3 years and had about 35 pieces in that show. And yeah, just with the New Orleans Haitian connection, it's still something that's under discussed. Like there's so many people, in New Orleans who don't realize that second lining, shotgun houses, like that was brought to New Orleans with that migration of Haitian people. And so just really looking for spaces constantly to show the collection and also show a different image of Haiti. Because I think, we always have traditionally through history, through mass media at least, always gotten these images of Haiti being this very poor and needy country, and it's actually, I mean, it has a lot of needs, but it's also one of the most beautiful and rich countries in world history, so like really just kind of showing that and using the collection to do that is a big part of what I do.
Thank you. It's so true though, because people forget, going back all the way to the Haitian Revolution, it's really important to know the long history. So do you see the question there for you, Nick, that Molando posed?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I actually was a part of the reenactment and yeah, did a nice bit of work with it. Less on the tail end, but yeah, I was a part of the planning it was, if you don't know, it was like a 3 or 4 year kind of planning process. So like on the front end, I was more involved, but then also participating in the reenactment. And Dred is, I mean, in some ways he was like a mentor during his time here because he had to spend, so much time in the city really planning that project, because it ended up being, 300 plus people as a part of that reenactment. So it was a huge, project that, I was honored to be a part of.
I interviewed him 3 days before it happened, but I couldn't stay. I had to leave. So I was just like, you're probably the first person I've spoken to that experienced it. There were the parts I feel like that weren't seen as much were like these moments where we would be walking for like, an hour and a half, 2 hours, and then we would just stop. And, for those who don't know the project, it was like a 25 mile like journey. We walked, and there were these moments where we would stop, and all of a sudden, like, we would just like out of nowhere, somebody would like beat one of their, either like their weapons some type of way with a rock or something. And it would just start into like this, like, just song. Like we would just like, it just like people just like, singing, dancing. And like, I captured some of it on my phone and video because it was just so beautiful. Because it was like, wow, this is literally what was happening 200 years ago. Like this is how we preserve, like we continue to sing through, these moments of revolution. And it was so many little beautiful moments like that I think weren't captured as much, on like the articles and all that stuff about it. But yeah, it was a beautiful experience.
Thank you so much for the question, Milando, and for sharing, Nick. So we've got about 1 minute and 30 seconds. I'd love to ask each of you for some quick pearls of wisdom, advice for our students, and just to say thank you so much again.
I'll go. I think it's really important to follow your heart, and you will hear people try to cast doubt on your callings. When I was called into the realm of folklore, which is, of course, Zora Neale Hurston's realm. If you know the work of Anna Julia Cooper, she was also a foremother in folklore. Certainly that doesn't sound practical at all. And my father recently said to me, I didn't know what the hell you were going to do with a degree in folklore. And now I understand you're doing whatever you want. You're writing, you're teaching at a premier university. You are helping to curate stories of our people. You're helping to dismantle white supremacy through a new historical canon. You're helping to make film. And so follow your heart. It will not be easy. Be entrepreneurial. Make sure your side hustles have side hustles. And take excellent care of yourselves.
Thank you so much, Michelle. All right. Well, I think we're just about at the end. And I just want to say from the AUC Art Collective, we're so thankful to have this conversation this evening. And we're also just really proud of all the work that each of you has done. And we're also thankful too for your willingness to share with our students and with the program. And we will be in touch to make sure that we can keep the intergenerational mentoring going. Thank you so much again. Good evening, all. Bye-bye.